Hello there, and many thanks for joining us on the program. Ever so often, politics and the parlor state of the economy tend to drown out many other fundamental existential issues that should mainstream our everyday lives. For example, we do not seem to pay the desired attention to our environment, the earth, which is the source of our being and economic sustenance. We simply take it for granted. In 2008, Nigeria created a gas master plan to end gas flaring. In 2016, it launched the gas flare commercialization program to monetize flared gas and end routine flaring by the year 2020. The goal then was to drive positive social, environmental, and economic impacts in the oil-bearing Niger Delta region by mobilizing private sector capital. The program was expected to generate 2,500 megawatts of power and create about 300,000 direct and indirect jobs, while eliminating over 20 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. It was also to provide clean energy for 6 million households. But according to the World Bank 2020 Global Gas Flaring Tracker, Nigeria is the 7th largest gas flaring country globally, surpassed only by Russia, Iraq, Iran, the United States, Algeria, and Venezuela, with just about 4 years to the 2025 target date for zero flaring. Nigeria has missed set deadlines 7 times since 1979, when it enacted the Associated Gas Reinjection Act. According to the Africa Energy Portal, Nigeria flares about 1.8 billion standard cubic feet of gas per day in the last 9 years, while losing over $2.5 billion yearly from 178 flare sites around the country. In 2020 alone, natural gas was valued at $1.24 billion that was burned by oil companies capable of generating electricity for about 804 million Nigerians annually. Ironically, the flared gas ought to attract a penalty of about $3.6 billion, which were not collected. Very importantly, more than 100,000 people, mostly women and children, on yearly basis die as a result of inhalation of exhaustive wastes. In Nigeria alone, 17 million tons of carbon monoxide is emitted into the atmosphere, contributing to global warming. Nigeria has ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement and is a signatory to the Global Gas Flaring Partnership Principles for Global Flare Out by 2030. How and why did Nigeria miss its set deadline 7 times since 1979? What are the implications of this unfriendly, health-damaging global warming and resource-losing gas flare? Join us as we interrogate these issues with none other than Mr. Environment himself, Nemo Bassi, an architect by training, author and poet, former chairman of Friends of the Earth International, former executive director of Environmental Rights Action for 2 decades, one of Times Magazine's Heroes of the Environment in the year 2009, holder of many other international awards, and all of this for his work on the environment, as well as being a member of the Federal Republic, MFR, in Nigeria. He is currently the Executive Director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation. Stay with us. When we return from this short break, we will go straight into the issues. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. Let's go straight now into our discussion. Mr. Nimo Bassey is our guest. Thank you so much for finding time to join us.
My pleasure.
I recognize that you do have a very busy schedule, so it's always very gratifying to be able to drag you to the studio to talk a bit about the environment. Where Nigeria and the rest of the world has just celebrated, in June, the International Environmental Day. If you were to assess the state of the environment in the Nigeria of today, post or maybe not post yet, during this COVID-19 era, what would you say it is?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me in this program. It's always a pleasure to be a part of the stimulating conversations here. Now, the COVID pandemic has given humanity a kind of pause, a little bit of a break to think, reflect about the environment, because the disease itself is connected to degradation of the environment, either habitat loss or manipulation of viruses in the laboratory. We're not quite sure right now. Nobody's sure where this pandemic came from. But whatever it is, it's got something to do with the environment. Now, it was said from many parts of the world that due to the pandemic and the lockdowns that resulted, the environment had a chance to recover. And so people could see wildlife coming back to life, fish returning to water bodies, the rivers getting cleaner because of less human activities. But it may not have been quite so in Nigeria, because while the lockdown was going on, polluting activities were never hindered. In fact, some of them were classified as essential service. And so the pollution continued. And we don't
like
really...
oil exploration.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that, but that's what I meant, yes. Oil spills were going on, oil activities were going on, and pollution was going on, which was rather unfortunate, because what we saw in the rest of the world, we didn't quite see it here. And I would say, secondly, that because of the depth of degradation in the total Nigerian environment, it would take a lot of hard work before you could look and say, well, we truly responded to the crisis that we're having. It's like we think that these things will take care of themselves, but they would not. We have to, because a lot of the environmental degradation we have in the world today, in Nigeria today, are created by human activities. It needs deliberate human action to reverse the impacts. And we're not seeing too much of that. The environment sector is not well funded. If you check budgetary allocations, the Ministry of Environment, either at the federal level or the state level, they still get very small budget, and there's a whole lot to be done. That's a ministry that virtually all the other ministries should look to as a cross-cutting ministry whose activities would help both the health sector, the agricultural sector, the water resource sector. This is where we should invest our resource, because the environment is our life. If you have the clean environment, you're going to have healthy population. If you have a healthy population, you have a vibrant workforce, and then you can take care of many things. So there's still a lot to be done, despite all the efforts that have been put towards safeguarding our environment.
This year, International Day of the Environment seems to have focused more on desertification. Of course, for very many countries and regions of the world, desertification is also a major problem. For Nigeria, are we doing enough to combat desertification?
Well, it's important for us to really consider what is desertification. Desertification is not the spreading of a desert. It's desert happening in an environment. A forest can turn into a desert without being close to any other desert. So this is a challenge for us in Nigeria. It's the way we manage our environment, the way we manage our vegetation cover, and the way we manage our water resources. Lake Chad has shrunk from 26,000 square kilometers down to about 1,500 square kilometers from what it was in the early 1960s. Mostly because, not just because of droughts and lack of rain, but because of also unmanaged usage of the water, the groundwater that normally would recharge the lake. And it's been said that, I was just reading some official documents, which noted that in recent years, one kind of surprising situation is that although the water is reduced to that level, it has more or less stabilized for a while. There have not been major shifts, which means that there are other factors rather than climate change that is driving the drainage or the shrinkage of the lake. Now, what do we do normally to tackle desertification? We call the 11 states in the north the frontline states that are impacted by desertification. But what are we really doing? The major action that we have currently is the building of the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall that is going for Djibouti in East Africa to Dakar in West Africa, at the tip of West Africa. Now that cuts across northern Nigeria. And if we really invest and consciously ensure that we plant indigenous varieties of trees and plants, we can be sure of getting a good outcome from that. But if we plant exotic plants, exotic species, and then just set up a few boreholes here and there to water the plants, if the people do not relate to the vegetation or to the trees and crops, they may not be interested in taking care of them. And so if you plant exotic trees and build fences around them, you're just alienating the people more. We need a system that grows with the full integration of the activities of local populations. You don't fence them out. You keep them in. Let them be the promoters, the champions of the greening of that region, so that we can now fight desertification in a very holistic and sustainable way. We can learn from farmers in Niger Republic. Niger is north of Nigeria. Niger is not all, it hasn't all turned into a desert. And so we have Niger as a buffer, as a zone ahead of us. We can learn from how they are regenerating the vegetation there. We can go to Burkina Faso, we can go to Mali, you can go to Benin Republic. The northern part of these countries, they have indigenous ways of managing vegetation, and they're doing quite well, I would say.
So, in other words, what you are saying now is that it appears that in our effort at combating desertification through the Great Green Wall, we do not seem to be carrying the local populace along. We do not seem to be involving them as much as we should in getting this done. It appears like every other government activity, we seem to be isolating the locals from the process.
The isolation of locals from processes of environmental action is a big mistake, and it all leads to actions. People seeing whatever projects are being brought in, people say, well, that's government project, that is a project for this corporation or from this person, and then everybody just turns back and it fails. And that's why we've had so many years of tree planting exercises done on television, with all the cameras, and then you maybe you drive a tank of water there and you water it and do everything, just like we launch waterworks, and then after the launching, it's not working. And so we plant trees, and nobody owns those trees, and they just die off. They don't grow the way they should. But the notion that locals are not fully integrated can be, I derived that from investigative journalism, who have done some report, but it could be that they're being, maybe because of those kind of reports, they're being better integrated. But what we should emphasize is that if you want to build a sustainable green wall, the locals should be the one driving the process. So government should just prepare the enabling environment and prepare the backstopping by giving like a station office. Say, do it this way, do it that way. Learn from the people. What would you normally have done with your local ideas, your local technologies? We don't need a standard, you don't need imported technology, you need appropriate technology, which is usually local and indigenous.
Okay, earlier on you spoke about oil spill, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Right. Not much of it is in the public glare these days. I mean, in the past, it used to be almost a daily reportage of oil spills in various communities, particularly in the Niger Delta region. What is the state of oil spill as of today in those regions? Do we still have communities that suffer on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week, month-by-month basis from oil spills, whether small or big?
Well, there's not a single day that you can go to the Niger Delta and you will not see an oil spill. It's a daily thing. Report from NOSRA, the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, showed that in 2018 and 2019, there were 1,300 oil spills, giving an average of 5 oil spills a day. Now, I mean, that figure is just fantastic. It's alarming. But that was the reality for those years. There's nothing to show that things have changed. I'll give you an example. In the midst of the pandemic, in April 2020, there was a blowout in a well off the coast of Ondo State, Rodo 1 well. It blew out, the fire and spill. That fire went on for up to a year. I suppose it's still on. We're monitoring it from satellite photographs. We're still seeing the streak of oil in the ocean. We're still seeing the fire burning. Now, is that in the news? No. Is anybody reporting on that? No. And there are other oil spills. Even abandoned oil wells are still leaking crude inside in the bushes of the Niger Delta. The Niger Delta, as far as oil spill is concerned, is a sacrifice zone. It's been sacrificed. And the worst thing is, now that oil is fast becoming an obsolete resource, Nigeria will soon not, right now Nigeria is not really an oil economy anymore, because oil is not bringing us more revenue than before. In the next decade, 2 decades, that will be all gone. What will happen to the place? What will happen to the Niger Delta? Who would clean up that mess that requires a lifetime of work to restore to a certain minimum level that we could say is livable? People are living in pollution, they are born in pollution, they live in pollution, they die in pollution, they're buried in pollution. Their culture is bound to pollution. You go to the Niger Delta, where you should be very glad to. You say one of the best dishes is fisherman's soup. The fishermen don't catch any fish. They depend on imported fish because of pollution. Or if somebody even catches a fish, they say I saw a fisherman at Goi in Ogoni. Coming back, his feet was covered in crude oil. The basin he was carrying was covered with crude oil, and he had a few miserable fishes inside the basin. And I asked him, what are you going to do with it? He said, he's going to eat the fish. So I said, can I buy them? And I paid 3,000 naira for the fish. And then because I didn't really want him to go eat it. But I said, okay, bring one, open it up. We opened the fish. There was traces of oil right in the belly of the fish. And I've noticed before that some people buy or catch polluted fish because they have no option. They don't have funds to buy imported or dry ice fish or whatever. They wash the fish, cook the fish, and eat the fish. And these fishes are loaded with heavy metals, impairing the health of people. And these are people who are breathing contaminated air. I mean, it's like it's not part of this country. Our policymakers need to go spend 5 minutes in polluted communities. Then they can have a better thinking about oil. And our leaders, too, from these areas, should also consider our people who are suffering these impacts and not just look for who is going to get what position in what agency and who's going to get one contract. What happens to the people? And when you go to your village, how do you survive there? Can you stay outside your home and breathe? Where there's gas flare, do you ever see the moon? There's gas flare, there's no electricity, and yet you cannot enjoy the natural nightscape. You can't enjoy hearing the insects and the birds because of the flare, the noise from the flare, exploding like bombs dropped in hell. I mean, it's a sorry state, I would say, but as always, we can change it. It doesn't have to be that way, so we can't lose hope.
I can relate with that very much because I come from a community where there's still gas flaring up to today, where, like you say, you cannot comfortably sit outside your home and enjoy fresh air or indeed breathe clean air.
No.
For say 30 minutes, 1 hour is really, really bad.
Yeah.
And many communities like that in the Niger Delta region are suffering from such menace of these oil companies.
Yes, recently I went to visit one Chief Royal Highness Dakolo in the Petiama Kingdom in Bayelsa State. sit in his palace. And he was telling us stories about, the environment and so on. And he said, I'm sitting here in my palace 500 meters from one of the worst gas flares in the Niger Delta. He said, they're burning us. I mean, when a first-class chief sits to describe that kind of terrible situation, it means that those who should do something are hearing about it. In fact, the man recently wrote a book called The Riddle of the Oil Thief. It's a fiction loaded with faction. It was launched about 2 weeks ago, a year ago. So if you look at this kind of documentation, the stories being told, the reportage we are seeing on TV by various news agencies, nobody can say we don't know what has happened. And of course, we have the UNEP report for the Ogoni as an example of what is going on.
I'm coming to that now. I mean, talking about cleanup, the Ogoni cleanup exercise. Nobody seems to be talking about it anymore, not even in government circles. What exactly is happening? Is the cleanup in progress? How much of it has been done?
Well, the cleanup is something that we should really be talking about every day. Because if we allow it to fade into the background, then the process would also be crippled. There are a number of things. The cleanup, of course, I cannot say it's not going on, but is it going on at the speed that we expect? No. Now, the talk of the town at the moment is that the first thing that should have been done is about being done, which is provision of alternative drinking water for the communities who are drinking water laced with benzene 900 times above World Health Organization standards. That's what we're talking about now. And the water works that we're talking about is the repair of existing, abandoned, moribund water supply system that was existing in Ogoni before, about six locations. So the fact of repairing that is important for the people because they've been saying, give us alternative drinking water. And that's been one of the emergency actions that should have been taken in 2011.
Exactly. I mean, several years after all of this cleanup exercise was launched with all the fanfare, with, in fact, the vice president being present, and all of that, just taking the very first step.
Yeah. the challenge has been, I think also the processes and the architecture for the cleanup has been a bit difficult. It's a learning process, but that doesn't excuse the fact that the first thing was not done first.
And so all these years, the people of Ogoniland and all the other communities that have been affected by this pollution have continued to live in pollution, have continued to carry out their economic activities in pollution. Like you put it, they have continued to die in pollution and be buried in pollution.
Very sad indeed. And, the first phase of the cleanup was on the location that were not so complicated. And so they were given to some contractors. A majority of those ones have been completed, remediated. For example, in the LMA areas, the polluted soils have been remediated in some of the locations. And I did mention in one of our conversations when UNEP did a report, the pollution had gone 5 meters, but by last year, when it was being concluded, the cleanup was concluded, they had gone down to 10 meters, which shows that the more you delay, the worse the problem gets. And so now, while the more complicated sites would be given out, we believe that the job should be given to corporate companies who have the competence, who have the technology, and who have the capacity. So they should tweak the procurement center a little bit, procurement process a little bit, to allow corporations who have the competence in such critical, very, very extensive, the cleanup of extensive damage to be part of the process. I mean, we like to give jobs to local contractors, and I do agree with that. But when you're facing very complicated systems, you need to find the best way to handle those things. Yeah, but I mean, look, it's not just Nigeria. The kind of warfare going in the Northeast, we have to also begin to clean up the military pollution. Community pollution is very complex and very harmful, and it could be there for a long time. And so the cleanup also has to begin. It's not enough to build community and return the people to the villages. You have to also detoxify the environment from military waste.
And of course, we can always infer that from what happened in places like Angola and Mozambique after the liberation struggle. How up to today, several decades after, they are still dealing with military pollution.
Yeah, including mines. I mean, when I was a child, when we went after the Civil War, we went back to my village with my parents, and we were playing, all the games we were playing, we would spent with bullets we found in the bush. We break them, bring out the gunpowder and set fire in certain ways, and play with bones of soldiers who died in the bush and things like that. So the pollution affects your psyche, affects how you relate to human life. And so what we're seeing now may look like things that we can deal with today, but the implication for the future is great, it's long-lasting. And so it's time to begin the process of not just dealing with the externalities, but dealing with the internal cultural dislocations and spiritual effects on the people.
And what's just playing in my mind right now as you speak is how this will impact children, particularly in the Niger Delta region where this pollution is deep-rooted. How children are brought up in this kind of environment, and how this affects them psychologically and health-wise.
A lot of children, the health implication on children is enormous. Now, the babies in the womb are affected. There are a lot of birth defects. There's a lot of maternal problems. In fact, the men are having a lot of infertility problems. People are having a lot of reproductive problems in the Niger Delta. And then the children growing up in polluted environment. If a child grows up in an environment where the child has never seen clean water, for example, never seen clean soil, never seen certain kinds of animals, of course, certain kinds of food species, crop species are no longer available. Now, if a child grows up in that situation, the child is definitely, his life is affected. His life cannot be the way we have been if the things were different. There's a day I went to one of the communities in Ogoni and I saw, well, twice now. I went once some years ago, saw some children swimming in the water. The water had a sheen of oil on it, so they saw that it was, when they come out, their body shining with the oil, the crude oil, which has impact on their skin, it has impact on their health generally, and they'll be drinking the water. When you're swimming, you drink some of the water. So they're drinking oil as they're swimming. Now, I think I must have spent close to 30 minutes persuading the children to come out of the water. And they were talking, they were very brilliant kids. They were giving me reasons why they wouldn't come out of the water. They said, well, we have to exercise, we have to have recreation, we have to swim. We can't go to town to go to swimming pools. This is our river, this is our community, this is the only place we can have to let off steam. And they kept splashing, doing some gymnastics and jumping up and down. Eventually they came out. I now asked them. Now, they told me they were all students, secondary school, so I said, okay, let's talk. When you grow up, what is your ambition in life? What do you want to be? This one said, I want to be, only two gave me a different answer. One said he wants to be a teacher, and one said he would like to be a health worker. The rest said they want to be politicians. All the rest, politicians, that's their ambition. So I asked them why. And they all burst in laughter. Because they say that politicians, when you're a politician, there's a certain way that things change for you without changing for your communities. You can now become a big man, have a police escort, have an array of cars, accompany wherever you're going. And then, of course, you're living a different life from the rest of the community. So if children are thinking of how to escape connection to the community, that is extremely harmful, extremely dangerous. Psychology is bad. And that they say that we have these leaders, they are not helping us, but I want to be like them, nevertheless. That is crazy. Then recently, some weeks back, I went back to the same community, and again, I met a lot of kids swimming. I spoke for a long time, not one came out of the water. Not one.
And
in fact, more were jumping into us as I was talking. So people have got to a point where they don't care what happens to them. Like Nigerians like to say person, something will kill person. People say things like that. So they don't care. They don't care. When people get to a point where they don't care about the quality of the environment, about the kind of things they eat, the food they eat, you tell them don't eat this, it's poisonous, and say, well, what will I eat? When we get to that point, it means we really have to re-engineer everything about our life in this nation.
The Niger Delta region must be one of the most polluted regions in the world.
Top 10, among the top 10 most polluted places. It's counted as one of the top 10 most polluted places in the world. And the worst thing is that we've not even examined the extent of the pollution. We've got the auditing of the Ogoni. How about the larger Niger Delta? Millions of people elsewhere, in Akwa Ibom, in Imo State, in Rivers, Bayelsa, Edo State, Ondo State, and the rest. This is the time that we should actually be carrying out the auditing of the pollution in every, apart from the whole Nigeria, but really the whole Niger Delta. and then begin the process of cleanup, while we still have a few dollars coming in from that sector. It's now.
All right, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll focus on the impact of gas flaring on health, on the economic sustenance of those affected, and of course, on global warming. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. We're still looking at the environment, and of course, our focus now will be looking at gas flaring. Nigeria is reputed to be the 7th nation in the world in terms of gas flaring. It's only surpassed by countries like Russia, like Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, and Algeria. But what exactly is the situation in Nigeria? Mr. Bassi, recently, let me begin from the international scene. Recently, there was a ruling at The Hague, which affected or which concerned Shell, one of the major oil companies operating in Nigeria. Now, that ruling ordered Shell to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by the year 2030. And many have said that that court ruling could have implications for Shell operations in other parts of the world, globally, particularly in Nigeria.
It would indeed have impact on the way they'll carry on their business. But I mean, why it could lead to a change of the way they do work, they do their things. It could lead to less pollution and be more cautious about the emissions. But you see, that ruling cuts across the whole value chain, not just the extraction of the oil, but also the marketing, the transportation, and the usage of the things that they produce. So it could affect the entire business model. Yeah, but the challenge I see in it is that these big polluters, these big oil companies, who are the major polluters, and the government that back them up, have found a way, a language that gives them a leeway so that they keep polluting, they keep with what we call business as usual, while appearing to be doing something. And that is where when you hear usually about, they say we're going to achieve net zero by 2050 or net zero by the year 2100. And what it means is that the net zero means, as the word says, it means that it's a mathematical equation. So you do something here, you do something bad here, you do something good here. So the good here is said to offset what the bad here. So you have net zero. When you plus and minus, you now say net zero. But so you keep on polluting. But the thing is that the so-called good you are doing is not really good, because you're not doing anything unusual. You are not doing anything additional. You are claiming what nature is doing as what you are doing. So you keep extracting fossil fuels, you keep burning crude oil, burning gas, releasing millions of tons of carbon, greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. And then what you could do is, for example, you go to a country like Nigeria, come to a country like Nigeria, or go to Gabon or Congo DR and buy up a chunk of their forest. And then you say, well, although I'm polluting, this forest over here is absorbing the equivalent of the carbon that I'm releasing here in Europe. And so I achieve net zero. What's that? You have not planted one single tree. You've only bought up a tract of forest. You sometimes maybe exclude the communities who live in that forest from harvesting, from planting things, from using the environment the way they've been using and maintaining it, and for you to come to see the trees today. And so you turn them into carbon slaves. This is carbon slavery, carbon colonialism. So you colonize the carbon in the trees, enslave the people to maintain the carbon in the trees, and then you keep on doing your business, and you say you've achieved net zero. So net zero is a scam, actually, because it's not zero. And the whole world is celebrating that in the Paris Agreement. One of the negotiations that's going on is how to practicalize the emission reduction. You've seen in the national determined contribution, Nigeria has just submitted her own, the update to what they submitted before. A lot of countries are talking about achieving net zero. It's now the fancy word, net zero, net zero, net zero, but it is not zero, because it means you are not doing anything. You are just supposing that what nature is doing is compensating for what you are doing. And so you keep doing with a clear conscience. It's like paying money for your sin to be forgiven. Your sin is not forgiven because you paid money or because you dashed a poor man money. It doesn't wipe out your sin. I mean, I'm not preaching, but we're just looking at it philosophically. That if you want to stop doing bad things, stop doing bad things. Don't do bad things and believe that something is going to compensate for the bad that you did. This is the way climate change action is being pursued in the world today. And it just means that at the end of the day, a lot of movement, a lot of motion, no movement.
In other words, the Paris Agreement entered into by even the global powers. The United States has returned to that agreement now with Biden in the White House and all of that. It appears that there is no sincerity in what is being pushed out there. It appears, from my understanding, that yes, it's all part of the international politics.
Yeah,
And the developing countries, the third world countries, are the worst for it, ultimately.
Yeah, the best thing about the Paris Agreement is that the whole world acknowledged that there's a problem and something needs to be done. You know, and almost everybody signed it. So almost everybody signed and endorsed. The U.S. went out and they back in. And so that is the big plus for the Paris Agreement, and that raises the hope of the world that something will be done ultimately. But negotiations have become political gymnastics. Countries go to negotiate to avoid action. And this is why the United Nations will be saying, increase your ambition, increase your... Are they talking to children? They're talking to adults, for goodness sake, politicians. You keep telling them, increase your ambition, and they say, we're increasing ambition, and they're not increasing any ambition. They are not really increasing their ambition. Even the finance to pay for the climate, to help poor countries combat global warming. Nigeria's contribution to stopping emissions is 45% dependent on external support, 20% unconditional. Now, that external support could come from a robust climate fund, if there was one. But even when, from Copenhagen to Paris to 2020, the idea was to contribute $10 billion a year for vulnerable countries to combat global warming. Then from 2020, $100 billion a year. None of these targets have been met. In 2012, when Nigeria had that massive flooding, we lost things worth up to $7 billion. In 2019, when Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique and the southeastern block of Africa, the damage done was counted in billions of dollars. So when we talk about $10 billion or $100 billion to fight global warming per year, it is a small amount of money. It wouldn't even do the job. But that's just a token that countries could contribute and say, yes, we recognize the fact that this needs to be done. And why the rich countries have a duty of making that money available is because they are responsible for global warming. Africa is responsible for only 3% of the global greenhouse emissions in the atmosphere, 3%, while other regions have 30% and above. And so those who have done the most harm have the most responsibility to take action to help those who are already drowning to stay afloat.
And from experience, it is also possible. And I mean, in fact, it's obvious that when you talk about this fund, those who may be contributing externally, external contributors to this fund, may actually be the main polluters, the main people who are contributing. When I say people now, even companies and yes, corporations and governments that are the major polluters of the environment.
This is the irony of the world. So the big polluters, those creating the problems, are also the most powerful when it comes to negotiation. So if you're going to, if somebody is responsible for creating a harm, and the person is the one to decide also on who is going to take off that harm, as much as they can avoid being harmed, just like climate change, nobody can really avoid it, but if they can, they already have a resilient system, they have the medical system, they have the emergency systems, so they are much more resilient than we are, and they are the ones to take action. So you can imagine that they want to take as little action as possible, conserve their resources for themselves. And this is why even the money they're contributing, rather than making this as money contributed to the wallet, they want to count loans they're giving to some countries or grants they're giving, other things that have strings attached. They want to now present that as their contribution to Green Climate Fund.
Is the world learning any lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic that the climate change and global warming could actually have such a disastrous impact on the entire world and not just the developing countries that contribute to only 3% to global warming?
Yeah, if I want to talk about reduction of emissions, some countries don't have any emission to reduce because they're not contributing to anything at all. But they still have to present their plan. We are going to reduce something, but there's nothing to reduce. Now, the pandemic ought to teach us that when things happen that are global, affect everybody, it's in everybody's best interest to cooperate. We learn to cooperate to some extent in terms of staying at home, being locked in, and not traveling when it's not necessary. People really try to stay. But you've seen also that there's a kind of xenophobia, nationalism that has come up from the pandemic. Rich countries virtually buy up all the vaccines, and then they let the trickle go to other regions. That doesn't show that we've learned our lesson. And the same thing can be extrapolated to how we're responding to global warming.
Now, according to the African Energy Portal, Nigeria flares about 1.8 billion standard cubic feet of gas per day. And of course, this has been on for 9 long years, and Nigeria in the process is losing an equivalent of about $2.5 billion yearly from 178, and that's a conservative figure, 178 flare sites across the country.
Yeah, the sad thing about gas flaring is that we're talking about gas that ought not to be flared. They are gas associated with crude oil extraction. A lot of the gas that we're using in our liquefied natural gas, outfits, installations, that are from gas fields. So the first thing would have been to harness all the gas that come out of the wells along with the crude oil. Instead of flaring them, it would have been to collect them, either to re-inject them, which will even help the companies get out more oil, or just keep it in the wells, or to collect them and use them for energy, production of energy. The gas being flared is sufficient to provide more than, I was listening to you at the introduction, said to provide electricity for 800 million Nigerians. We're not up to, we're just about
120 million.
A quarter of that. We're a quarter of that population.
So we should be able to produce enough to even sell to neighboring countries.
There's enough gas to produce electricity for Africa, and we're burning it and wasting it.
So unfortunate.
And we're killing people at it, because this is extremely dangerous to human health, causing cancers, causing breathing difficulties, causing all kinds of economic harms, including acid rain.
An estimated 100,000 people die yearly from gas flaring across the world. Incredible.
Might be more.
Yes, those figures are estimates that are put out here. Now, if we look at the health, the economic impact of gas flaring, one begins to wonder why it has taken Nigeria this long to take seriously this issue, considering the fact that we have missed 7 targets, 7 deadlines since 1979.
Yeah.
Is there a lack of political will, or that the major pollutants, the big corporations, are the ones who are pulling the strings?
You've answered your own question, but let me say that the problem is with the industrial arrangement in the petroleum sector in this country, where the government is in joint venture partnership with the polluters in almost in all the fields. And so when we penalize gas flaring, we made a penalty, and the oil companies can afford to pay or even ignore and not pay the fine. So once you put a fine, it means that, look, you can keep on doing what you are doing, no problem. Keep flaring, pay the fine. And then government is also responsible for paying the fine, because they're in joint venture. This payment is not exclusive to the corporation.
And they're not even paying.
Now
government is not collecting.
If a goat is asked to watch over a tuber of yam, it will take a miracle for that yam to be preserved. And so you have government trying to penalize itself, being the regulator, being the judge, being everything. There's something wrong. This is why we need to have a very critical review of the entire regulatory environment. If remember when some years back in the Senate, there was a bill that was being pursued that gas flaring should attract a fine. People should pay for the commercial value of the gas. If that bill had become law, there would have been a big incentive for everyone to learn a lesson and stop flaring gas, because then you'll be burning your money. But now they're burning people's lives. People are disposable. We have disposable citizens of the Niger Delta. You can dispose of them, it doesn't matter. Dispose of the resource that ought to be something for the whole country, it doesn't matter. So disposable resource, disposable people, disposable money, and everything just goes up in smoke.
The PIB has been in the National Assembly. As we speak, is still under consideration. Do you think that any portion of that bill, if it becomes law, would in any way help in reducing gas flaring?
What would help to stop gas flaring is the gas flare master plan. And the fact, and if you quickly realize that this is a fading resource, and that this assets will soon become stranded, should maximize whatever you can get from it at this time. The PIB, the major thing in the PIB that the communities are concerned about is what will go to the communities. And that itself is extremely contentious, because it's the oil companies who are, the bill empowers the oil companies to determine which is the host community and who sits on the board, who will decide what the money is to be used for and how it will be used. The oil companies and the government are the ones nominating the people who sit on those boards. So this is rigged against the people all the way.
So in other words, even the much anticipated PIB, if it becomes law, will not drastically alter the situation?
No, it will not. It will not. It may actually even make it more complex in terms of community relations, because if oil companies determine who is a host community, that could be a source for generating conflict between communities. Every community in the United States is a host community, because you either host the facilities or you host the pollution. All the rivers are all the creeks are interconnected. And so you have pollution in Asokoro, the water carries it all the way to Maitama. And then you tell me there is Asokoro because they say all the way to Asokoro they are the host community. Meanwhile, the pollution has got to Maitama, and so I suffer all the pollution, and then I'm not considered for anything. It doesn't work that way.
Mr. Nemo Bassi, Executive Director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation, has been our guest in the last 55 minutes or thereabout. Just before we go, a last word. What exactly would you be telling our lawmakers as they get to the final stages of the consideration of the PIB?
Well, what I would say is simple. They should sit down and read that law word by word, clause by clause, line by line, individually, and ask their consciences who drafted that law. What was the intention of those who drafted the law? How would it affect the communities and the local environment? What would the future say about that law? That's what they should think about. Because that law should, if it replaces the laws that were drawn during the Nigerian Civil War, it shouldn't be another thing to light more fires. It should be bringing calm to the region and helping the nation as a whole.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, that's our program for today. We have had Mr. Nemo Bassi, an author, an architect, an environmental activist who's been on the field for decades in the fight to make the Nigerian environment a better place. And, of course, an environment that provides sustainable development for the people who inhabit it. Once again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, for you, our viewers, we want to thank you immensely for investing your time with us. My name is Imoni Amarere. Join us again. We'll bring you another edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.